Morning, Mr. Will. We are live, sir.
Good morning, Rich. How you doing this morning, brother?
I'm doing really good. I don't know if I'm doing as good as you, but I'm doing good.
Yeah, I had some good news yesterday.
Tell me about it.
I've got twin 15-year-olds that are freshmen in high school. My son walked onto the wrestling team with zero experience and made varsity, so he's got his first meet today. And my daughter, she took a few years off gymnastics and walked onto the high school gymnastics team and made the varsity team as well. So, yeah, they get that athletic ability from my wife because ain't from me.
Yeah, there's a zero athletic ability here, bro. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. As long as you can run fast, shoot guns, and roll around on the ground and
that's it.
Twist joints around, you're good to go.
Yep, and there ain't nothing else. I remember in the Marine Corps, somebody said that in the Marine Corps, you're basically a professional athlete because you get paid for your athletic performance. Anyway, I remember we used to do this thing called combat soccer, where you wear your helmet, your flak jacket, you're playing soccer, and pretty much everything was allowed. Couldn't touch the ball with your hands, but you could beat the crap out of people. It was awesome.
Awesome.
But I remember we played combat soccer. We played all these games, and we got to volleyball. And finally, my sergeant looks around, and was like, "Brown, is there not a single sport you're good at? Not one?" And I'm like, "No, Sergeant, I suck at everything."
I live on a lake, and people are like, "You like to fish?" I'm like, "Well, I'm pretty good at drinking beer outdoors. I can't fish to save my life, but I can drink beer outside."
Well, there you go. You're halfway there, man. Put a rod in your hand, and you're winning.
Find what you're good at and stay with it.
That's what I've always said. We got Rudy is on this morning. Will, looks like we got John on from Yukon, Oklahoma. Ryan and Tracy are on. Mr. Will Parker is on. James White is on. Please like and hit that share button, folks. We got a phenomenal show for you this morning. This one will not disappoint. As Will and I continue to walk you through the American economy, and I'm going to take us from where Will left off, 1971. I'm going to take us through probably the end of 1981 today, kind of hit some of the wave points, some of the important things that are kind of laying the foundation for where we find ourselves today. Right, Will?
Yeah, absolutely. It's without an understanding of everything we've gone through it, I don't think a person can see the nuance of what's happening today and get properly prepared for it.
Yeah, so I think we should introduce ourselves. My name is Rich Brown, co-host, co-founder of the American Warrior Society, American Warrior Show, and you're joining us on Emerging Threats. I'm joined today by a man who needs no introduction. He was voted sexiest commercial airline pilot alive 3 years running from Cracked Magazine. Mr. Will Wood. Will, you want to? I don't know if that's a good enough introduction.
I see there's no drug tests out there on the farm, are there, Rich? Miss Lisa hasn't enforced that, has she?
No.
My name is Will Wood. I'm a commercial airline pilot. Just really enjoy news, economics, self-defense. And, I've really begun to understand, Rich, that, I was thinking about it last night because on past shows, you were talking about how, this economic stuff is part of self-defense, part of being prepared. And it got me, I've really been thinking about that. And last night it kind of dawned on me, this knowledge and the stuff we're going to talk about after we get through present day with this is what's given us our reactionary gap that, keeping, like when you were a cop, keeping somebody away from you so you had time to react. Well, the things we're learning and passing on, hopefully folks are picking up on, that knowledge will help us all get ready so that if, the really bad times do show up, just like in a self-defense scenario, we got that reactionary gap. We've got time to make some good decisions and better protect our families.
I love the way you framed it. I think that's exactly right. When you and I were chit-chatting back in late January, early February about this virus going around in China, COVID, and we were talking about some of the things we were doing to prepare. So by being forward thinking and forward looking, we're able to create and maintain those gaps. So I think that's a brilliant way of looking at it.
I'm kind of proud of myself, to be honest with you.
Well, you should be. Let's talk about our sponsors, Will.
Sure.
See. You got a Cool Fire Trainer, right?
I do. Yeah, I got it from my Block 17.
Tell us about the Cool Fire Trainer.
I love that thing. I mean, dry fire is good, and I still do that from time to time. But Cool Fire, you put that in there, charge it up. I got one of them big, giant, bottles to charge it up with. You charge it up, you get some felt recoil out of it, and it forces you to keep a good grip on the gun. And one thing I really came to realize after I started listening to you and Mike on your podcasts way back when was how important the grip was. I'd always say, you grab a hold of the gun, but the Cool Fire keeps you honest during your what would otherwise be dry fire training. I catch myself, if I do dry fire for a while, I'm not as good as if I do Cool Fire. And
I never considered that.
I've used it as well.
That.
Like we've talked about before. I've used it with brand new shooters, and I've always started new shooters with dry fire, but I'll start them with dry fire, do maybe a half hour of that in the garage, and then I'll throw the Cool Fire trainer in the gun and have them use that, and they start to get a little bit of a feel for it. And it's a whole lot easier for them to transition to live fire shooting especially if it's their first time using all those new skills. So I find it absolutely invaluable.
I agree with you. I never considered the fact that, your grip can get kind of sloppy when you're dry firing, but with Cool Fire, you're not going to get sloppy, especially if that thing's fully charged. Yep. It could jump out of your hand.
Absolutely. Yeah, it jumps on you pretty good.
We also have Century Martial. What's that?
I was just asking what other sponsors we have this morning.
Yeah, man, we got the Century Martial Arts, makers of the Bob XL. The Bob XL, the body opponent bag, extra long, can take that strike game to the next level. Please check them out. We also have apphemp.com. That's my good friends Jesse Ross and his beautiful family. Gordon, the finest CBD products money can buy. Check them out in the links to today's show, which is check out the American Warrior Show. It'll take you over there on the right-hand side of that page. You'll see links to all of our amazing sponsors. Yesterday, I had one of our members reach out to me. It's like, hey, Rich, what's the discount code for Precision Holsters? You don't need to email me, folks. All you got to do is go to American Warrior Show, and you can find the links to everything. Yeah, Will says maybe Freddie Merck should start sponsoring the show too, man. I think that's a phenomenal idea. Looks like Mr. Mike Seeklander is on. He says, morning, folks, please like and share. Mountain Man Medical, man. I've said this so many times before, and I think Will would agree with me.
Mm-hmm.
You need to have that trauma kit, right, Will?
You got to have it. I carry one in each vehicle. Covers my family of 5, plus, a couple extra kits in there to handle some more injuries if, God forbid, it's needed.
Yeah, God forbid, man. God forbid it's needed. But yeah, Mountain Man Medical, for what it would cost to take your family to dinner in today's crazy age, you can get an amazing trauma kit that has everything you need to sustain life until you can get your family member to the emergency room. We also have, last but not least, precisionholsters.com, makers of the Mike Seeklander Signature Series. Check that out. Go to American Warrior Show, click on the link for Precision Holsters, and check out that sexy gear, the Fast Holster, PHAST, Mike Signature Series, as well as the competition models and the Ultra Penics that I use. I've seen pictures of JJ Ricazza wearing it, the great one, Mr. Rob Leatham, of course, Mike Seeklander, of course, your pal Rich Brown uses Precision Holsters. I absolutely love their products. Please check them out. And Mike has given us a link to the Mike Seeklander Signature Edition. Thank you, sir. Tony is on. Sweet. Greg is on. Guile is on from the Philippines. Okay, I guess we can get into the show, Will.
Yeah, let's get after it.
So I'm going to talk about, like I said, I'm going to kind of pick up where you left off. I believe you left off around 1971. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So in 1970s, I'm just going to kind of give a broad brush, and then we'll really kind of go down deep into the weeds on some of these things. And because what we're hoping to accomplish with these emerging series is, once we get you through the economy and you have a bigger contextual idea of what's been happening that's led to where we are, then we're going to give you some action steps that you can take to prepare yourself for what may be in store for us. So inflation skyrockets in the 1970s. Consumer prices rise, especially oil. Because one of my most vivid memories of being a kid in the 70s is having to wait in line for gas, man.
Yep, I remember that as well.
So then in 1979, President Carter, one of the only things he ever did was nominated Paul Volcker to be the Fed chair, and his goal, of course, was to break inflation stranglehold on the U.S. economy. As we'll see, we were in pretty bad straits here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
now,
it was ugly.
It was ugly, man. So in 1971, as you talked about last week, Nixon ends the convertibility of gold. You can no longer convert US dollars into gold for reasons that you outlined. And if you want to go back and see last week's show, but I mean, literally, the French came over with ships, not warships, but they came over with boats and said, hey, man, I'm going to convert these dollars, give me some gold. And other countries were doing that too, the UK and some others. So Nixon has to do something because he's afraid that people are going to lose trust in the dollar, which now becomes fiat currency. It's backed by nothing but the full faith and credit of the U.S. government or something like that.
Yeah.
So he imposes wages and price controls, man. Are wages and price controls ever a good idea?
No, we can see that. Well, we don't directly have that in the U.S. today. We can see bits of it. We see it in New York City with rent control, right? And those apartments that are that are under rent control are very difficult to get, and it takes inventory off the market, and therefore it is served to drive up the price on the other items, the other apartments in this case. It'll also drive, if it's a manufacturing production type situation, if they can't make money, they'll just close down.
Yeah, and I remember my grandfather, man. He was always like, "You cannot do price controls," and he would explain what little he understood about it. But as a grower and seller of produce and other things, he was always really negative on any time somebody had that as an idea. So please like and hit that share button, because in 1973, the Yom Kippur War starts, and the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, aka OPEC, they increased oil production. They increased oil prices, but they decreased production and imposed oil embargoes on the United States for a variety of reasons. Because one, we were supplying money and weapons to the Israelis, but we're also just into the convertibility of gold. So we got a double whammy. They don't want to deal with us. And again, it's funny because you think we would learn from history that these OPEC nations can jerk our chain anytime we want. And you'd think we would have pipelines in the U.S. that could deal with that.
You would think so, wouldn't you? You would think. The part that amazes me, or we can talk about politicians and the politics of that. My question is, why don't the citizens? Why aren't we demanding that we don't want to be dependent on these other countries like this? I've never understood why there isn't a groundswell of anger from the American public about this. Maybe it's the bread and circuses. I don't know, but it's always amazed me.
Yeah, it's like your first act as president was to kill a pipeline. It doesn't make any sense, and we have to go begging hat in hand to OPEC when we've seen for the last 50 years that we just hand them more leverage and more leverage. I don't get it. Maybe there's something bigger that you and I don't see.
Well, so and then they turn around and release oil from a strategic oil reserve, and it was only 3 days worth of oil usage. So whoop-de-doo. And that ticks OPEC off, and they go, okay, fine, we're not going to pick up production. So you damned if you do, you're damned if you don't.
Yeah, or you can just become energy independent. How about that?
There you go. That works for me. And we were a net exporter.
Yeah. I've always said that was the greatest failure of 9/11 was to become energy independent as a nation and make that our strategic implication, just like we did with, when John F. Kennedy said, we're going to go to the moon in the next 10 years, and people laughed. And it's like, no, we're going to do this. So 1974 rolls around. The oil embargo triggers the 1974-1975 world recession. The FDIC, which, of course, insures your money in the bank, increases its limit from back then. The FDIC said we'll only cover $20,000, but with inflation and money becoming less valuable, they say, okay, we'll raise it to $40,000. And to provide some context for that, I'm reminded that in 1966, when my uncle was a Marine killed in Vietnam, the Servicemen's Group Life Insurance, SGLI, which pays out when servicemen die, the family was given $15,000, and his parents, because Danny was 18 years old when he got killed, so he had no girlfriend, no wife, no nothing.
Okay.
So the money went to the parents. Parents went out and bought a brand new house with $18,000, a beautiful house, a 2-story brick colonial. And nowadays, so 1966, $15,000. Now the SGLI is $400,000, and with $400,000, you can go out and buy probably a nice brick colonial. So what does that tell you?
Well, the house didn't get any more valuable.
That's right.
Just depreciation of the value of the dollar. Again and again, we see it all over the place.
Which makes you wonder, like, what will that be in another 55 years?
I don't think it continue. I don't think it long term. I don't think we can continue on this pace. I'm sure people were saying that 55 years ago as well. But at some point, something's got to give, brother.
Yeah, and will it happen in our lifetime? I don't know. Will it happen in our kids' lifetime? I don't know. But I don't see how you can keep doing this without severe consequences.
Yep. Well, as you said, it's the full faith and credit of the U.S. government. At some point, that faith runs out. We can ask Argentina. We can ask Venezuelans about that. Zimbabweans. We can ask a lot of different places about that. Ask folks in Turkey right now. The lira is down 33% in the last month.
Yeah, absolutely. Gerald says, I think the current administration is sabotaging our economy on purpose. One could make a strong case for that if one decided to do it.
I think it'd be pretty hard to do all this by accident.
Yeah. Jeff says, it's insane that I have to deal with that oil embargo with poor resin quality from my 1976 sailboats all these years later. Yeah, I remember Jeff telling me that the resin from those boats, because of the oil embargo, was substandard because they couldn't get enough to produce good resin. And so now he's having to do all these things to his boat just because of it. Isn't that weird?
That is. It just goes to show that, decisions made when we were children, can come back and haunt us decades later.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, in researching for the show, when I sent you the show notes last night, Will, there was a lot of things I saw during the 70s about these third world countries and how it infected. It's kind of a good word. It infected and affected the world banks, the debt of these third world countries, and they just continued to pile up. I don't want to really go down that rabbit hole because, yes, the whole world was in a recession in the 70s. Let's suffice it to say that it affected everybody, some countries worse than others.
Yep.
I mean,
for sure.
Those of us that remember the 70s and thinking of New York, you had movies like Fort Apache, The Bronx, Serpico, Escape from New York, Warriors. I mean, all these movies depicted the slow, steady slide that New York City was descending into anarchy and chaos. And sure enough, man, they begged the president for a bailout to the tune of several $billion. And of course, President Ford at first didn't want to do it, but then they start, what is the one faucet they can do? They start stopping the policing, or at least firing cops and stopping sanitation. And this just makes the problem worse.
Right. Yep. And they raise taxes, of course, because it's always the answer. So, yeah, I remember, Times Square was a viper's pit. I mean, adult bookstores, strip clubs, all that kind of stuff, it's crazy. And they got it turned around by doing the exact opposite of what got them there. And then once it was turned around, they went back to doing what got them there.
I never understand why humans they don't get it. You know what I'm saying? It's like, John Shriver says, I remember my first job after my PhD in 1973. I had an annual salary of $15,000. He said, I was rich. Now it would be poverty.
Yep.
So 1977 comes along. Inflation accelerates when Jimmy Carter, he emphasizes restoring economic growth when what he should have been doing is controlling inflation.
Yep.
Of course, we remember 1977 comes around. There's the Iranian Revolution. The Shah is coming to the United States for cancer treatments when he's deposed, and Middle Eastern oil production is cut again, and of course, international oil prices just go through the roof again.
Yep.
There's also some stuff that starts to brew with the savings and loan industry in America. I don't know how far we need to go into that. We may dip our toe into it a little bit, because I think that it really just ties into the inflation piece, and maybe we won't discuss it. But in 1979, like I said, Jimmy Carter, one of his only wise things he ever did was appointing Paul Volcker to the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board. And at that time, inflation was over 13%. And Volcker, of course, his main job is reducing inflation and putting Americans back to work, as we'll talk about a little bit more, because I think I'll look at my notes here in a second, but I believe unemployment was around 11%.
I'm seeing 13% here on your notes, brother.
Yeah, that was inflation, but as far as like unemployment, maybe it was.
Oh, you're right. Yeah. Actually, I don't see that number here, but I'll bet you it was that, if not more.
Yeah. So Volcker, in order to get inflation under control, he realizes he's got to control the money supply, which leads us into, so this is at the end of that Volcker comes in the end of 1979, 1980s. The economy continues to slow. We've got something called stagflation, which is a combination of the words stagnation and inflation. Obviously, it's an economic condition characterized by slow growth and high unemployment. So 1980 comes around. I really don't want to talk about the savings and loan thing. What do you think, Will?
I think there's one little point to touch on there with the savings and loan, and it's that what got them into trouble was as all businesses, they're trying to maximize profits. But what really got them in trouble is that there was a lack of prudent oversight. It was a little bit of the Wild West going on. And to maximize profits, they were borrowing short, which meant they were borrowing short-term money, say 1 to 5 year money, but they were loaning it long. They were loaning on 30-year fixed mortgages. And they didn't think anybody would have the guts to raise interest rates. So when interest rates started going up, they got upside down real fast because they had to keep rolling over that short-term debt. And they'd loan money out on a 30-year note. So they got themselves upside down pretty fast. So it's just worth noting that, between that and the housing crisis of 07, 08, history doesn't repeat, but it sure does rhyme.
Yeah. So, the net effect of all that he was brilliant synopsis there. The savings and loan combined net worth is a negative $18 billion. So the American savings and loan industry is in the hole $18 billion. And 85% of savings and loans are losing money. 15% of the savings and loans are broke. And because of all of this, the FDIC, who employed at that time a little less than 4,000 people, and most of them were bank examiners, 10 FDIC insured banks with a total assets of over $250 million fail. And so in looking at all the failures, we also had the big three car manufacturers, Ford, GM, and Chrysler. All these guys were getting their rear ends kicked by Japanese companies like Honda and Toyota.
Yeah, they sure were.
Yeah, they were beating them on quality and price. And if you haven't read, I think it's called The Toyota Way, which was a brilliant book, and it really shines a dark light on the American car industry of the 1970s and just why they were in the position to get their rear ends kicked. But President Carter signs, I believe it's still the biggest bailout in history when he bailed out the car manufacturers several $1 billion worth to make them solvent again. And what if he hadn't done that, man?
Well, it's the big debate, right? Capitalism tells you, let them go out of business. They'll reinvent themselves and come back and be stronger and better and learn from those mistakes. If you bail them out, then you get a lot of what we're seeing out there right now, in my opinion, is oh, they'll backstop us. Why should I change my behavior? And it just, I'm more of a fan of let this stuff fail. If we would have let a bunch of banks fail after the Great Recession, I bet you they'd be behaving a whole lot different right about now. Maybe they would have tightened lending standards and would have cracked down on fraudulent appraisals and things like that. That unfortunately we're starting to see some of that stuff come back. We're not back to ninja loans yet, but we're moving that direction.
Yeah, and for those of you that don't know, that ninja loans was it no income, no job loans?
No job. Yeah.
Yeah.
Literally,
no income, no job.
Let me get a photocopy of your driver's license, and we'll lend you $400,000.
Yeah,
it was crazy.
It's insanity. The concept.
One thing I want to throw out there. One thing I want to throw out there on stagflation is in the 70s. There was the theory, which escapes me at the moment, but mainstream economists at the time thought that stagflation was a realistic impossibility. It could only be done in theory because they believed that as long as you printed money, an economy would grow. It was a given. It's just all there was to it. Why wouldn't it grow? And there's another thing called the Phillips curve, which Jerome Powell recently came out and admitted had been broken. And this is another one they said could never be broken. And the Phillips curve said that as long as you're printing money, unemployment will go down. And we've proven that wrong now with stimmy checks. So what's next? What are we going to prove wrong next? Maybe the full faith and credit?
I know, man. I know. I'm so glad you said that. That's so true. Steve says, such an important topic. I spent much time working on projects in domestic and foreign-based car manufacturers. I have seen the difference firsthand. You speak the truth. Thank you, Steve, for throwing that out there. Yeah. And again, thank you to the 23 folks joining us live. Will says, good morning, Rich. Miss Betty says, good morning, Warriors. Guile says, good morning, Miss Betty. So there's
actually, before we start back up there, Rich, Steve, I would love it if you could throw something up on the AWS Coin members page. Maybe if you could throw a little something together, I would love to hear about what you've seen there and how it might relate to what we can learn about with today's situation. And, because we've got manufacturers talking about reshoring stuff because they've realized that the supply chain, like you and I've talked about, Rich, is broken. A lot of furniture manufacturers are bringing production back from Vietnam right now to Mexico and the U.S. Oh, you muted there, brother.
Of course I'm muted. That's what I do, man. I won actually in high school, I won the muting award. So it's kind of
awesome.
Yeah. So there was a Depository Institution Deregulation and Monetary Control Act of 1980. There's a mouthful for you. But what it did was Congress is trying to help out savings and loan and get this interest mismatch that they found themselves in. So they allowed savings and loans to offer checking accounts for the first time, believe it or not. That didn't happen until 1981. And they allowed them to issue credit cards. And the FDIC, because of inflation, has to increase the amount that they will insure from 40,000 to 100,000. So here we are. Well, in 10 years, they go from 20 to 40 and 40 to 100,000. Why?
Yep. Everything happens slowly and then all at once, my friend.
I know.
And that's, it's nothing in life is linear. It all goes exponential at some point.
Yeah. So, Ronald Reagan comes in. This is 1981. He's president from 1981, of course, till 1989. GDP in 1981 declines by 2%. Inflation reaches 14%. Mortgage rates, let me say this again, mortgage rates reach 21%. Unemployment reaches 11%. And on December 19th of 1981, the prime rate reaches 21.5%. And this is during Volcker's tenure. Due to the effects of high interest rates on construction, farming, and industrial sectors accumulating in the indebted farmers driving their tractors into Washington, D.C. and blockading. So we're not that bad yet, but we could see something like that happen.
We haven't seen that, but we've seen, back then I didn't see any police stations burning. I didn't see smash and grab stuff going on like we're seeing. So it doesn't repeat, but it rhymes, right?
Well, and let's return to that concept of moral hazard that you alluded to a moment ago. You have to let these companies, when they do bad things, you got to let them fail. And I know that hurts mom and pop, and that destroys 401k, and it hurts our country in ways, but you have to have some moral hazard. And I'll share with you Rich Brown's moral hazard. So I may have told this story before. My parents give me my first car is a 1972 Dodge Demon. It's got a big 340 in it. You could smoke the tires off. I mean, it was this beautiful classic Mopar car, and gas was 68 cents a gallon back then, Will. I sound like an old timer. So
you do actually. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've got my job. I've got a job at McDonald's making $3.35 an hour. And I'm just loving my Demon, you know, and I go fast. I drive fast everywhere I go. I always have. And I get pulled over by the police for the first time in Smyrna, Tennessee. I get the city summons, you know, to go pay the fine. I get in there and the lady's like, okay, darling, it's going to be $26. And instead of going, man, that's a lot of money, I go, that's it. And she's like, and I was going like 70 and a 40 or whatever. And she's like, yeah, honey, that's it. And just so you know, we don't turn this into the state. So it never goes against your insurance. It doesn't go against your points. And I'm like, so whoa. Wait, make sure I understand this. So for $26, I can drive as fast as I want. And she's like, yeah, pretty much. I'm like, man, I swear to God, I go, ma'am, you will see me again. So, which is true. I mean, to me, this became a cost of doing business. I got stopped all the time, paid my $26, and then dropped the hammer again, you know?
Absolutely. Get after it.
But I mean, it's like, there's got to be moral hazard. If they would have slapped me with a $500 fine, brother, I would still be a slow driver today.
Yep. And that's, and you were talking about how, you know, there's pain for mom and pops, there's pain in 401ks, you know, but in the long run, just like when we learn anything in life, we come out better for it on the other end. And you got to trade that short-term pain for that long-term gain, whether it's in the gym, learning this stuff, doing your dry fire, it pays off in the long run. And as a society, we just think too short-term. Oh, we can't have a recession. Why not? You know, if a family is prepared for that, that's a health restoring event in the economy, and it lets the people who have behaved responsibly and prudently take advantage of those opportunities that are there now, and it teaches future generations to be prudent and be good stewards of their resources.
Yeah, I completely 100% agree. I mean, I know it's painful. I get it. So let's discuss the prime rate for just a second, because it's important to understand what a enormous deal it was on December the 19th, 1981, when the prime interest rate hit 21.5%. If you've ever looked at the blurry type 4.5 font on the back of your credit card statement, you've probably seen this reference many times. And what often you'll see is that your credit card balance you're gonna have to pay interest on 13% plus the prime rate. So when the prime rate was 21.5 and your credit card statement says you're going to be paying 13% above prime rate. And again, prime rate is the best you can get. The prime rate is what they give to their best customers. So for normal people, you get 13% above prime. Now, 13% above prime, when prime is 21.5, means that you're paying 34.5% interest on that credit card. I mean, that's incredible.
That's unreal.
And the prime rate floats. So that's why, you know, 1 month statement may differ from another month's statement, but it's something that you people need to think about. So really, that's kind of where I'm going to leave us, Will. But just to set the stage for where Will's going to take us, you know, 1981 through 1986, you know, Reagan economics seems to be working because oil prices begin to drop. The things that Paul Volcker does to limit cash seems to be working. And there's a tax reform act that Will's probably going to talk about, and some other things that stimulate economic growth. But But that's kind of where we're at there from 1971 to end of 1981.
Yep. And, you know, as I was thinking about this period of time, and I was young. I was born in '68. But my parents owned a business throughout all this, and a couple things really stuck with me throughout this time period. One was I'll call it a depression, and I don't mean that in the economic sense, but I grew up in farm implement country. Headquarters of John Deere, worldwide headquarters of John Deere was 5 miles down the road, and everybody just felt like that was it. America's over. There's nothing we can do. If there's World War III, the Russians will beat us. It was that great malaise that Carter talked about, and it was real. People just there was no optimism in the country. It was, I mean, it's impacted me to this day. I don't. I want a bright future for myself and for my children, but I'm always waiting for the next recession. As my wife told me once, I've correctly predicted 11 of the last 2 recessions.
Yeah, that's pretty good. I mean,
so, but I'm always ready for that shoe to drop. But when the shoe drops, when something goes sideways, I tend to be ready for it. But it also makes it difficult to see some of the joy in life sometimes, honestly. So, I don't see our country, our society wanting to suffer that kind of pain again. And that scares me, because the longer we put it off, the worse it's going to be.
I think there's so many things vying for people's attention nowadays. I was trying to explain this to the kids the other day. So, growing up, there was like 3 channels. And I remember the first cable channels coming online, maybe in the late 70s. We bought a subscription to some sort of cable TV. So we all watch the same news channel. We all, there wasn't things like podcasts. There wasn't the internet. You couldn't get, things were just different in ways that it's hard to clarify and explain it today. But I remember the same sort of malaise that you reference, and like, man, we're sliding into the abyss. And of course, I like the old Reagan campaign. It's morning again in America. And if you've ever seen that commercial, the sun is coming up across American farmland, and it was just like, okay, maybe we can pull out of this. And of course we did. Yeah. But I think we're failing to learn the lessons of history, and printing money is not the way to do it. I mean, we've seen it.
Yeah. Yep. And Reagan was a great leader, and I'm a big fan of Reagan. So as I say this, I'm not being dismissive of the things he did, but he had a lot more tools in the toolbox, a lot more options than what we have now. When, under Carter and then into Reagan, they raised interest rates like that. The national debt was next to nothing. So servicing that debt was much easier. I've read reports that if we get interest rates, 4 or 5%, our national debt now becomes unserviceable. Literally, they can't raise taxes high enough to service it. So I don't know what the answer is to that.
I don't either. And I've seen a lot of, economists trying to explain this on YouTube. Really, there's almost no way to do it. Now, the people will say, Will and Rich, dude, what do you not understand? Servicing the debt, bro. We got a printing press. We just print more money. What's the problem, man? And it's like,
we know where that goes, right?
Exactly.
And that's what they're doing. And in fairness, what other choice do they really have at this point? It's like a family caught in the credit card debt cycle. Now it starts off with excessive spending in the beginning, but at some point it turns into a downward spiral, and you got to pay the piper at some point.
Yeah, you do, man. And you mentioned Reagan had more tools at his disposal. Do you care to unpack any of that, Will, at this point?
Well, he had. I can touch on it off the top of my head. The biggest one he had was the ability to lower taxes, because they were very high at the time. So we had that, and of course taxes could still be lowered today. Put aside the political infighting on that, because they are above zero, they could be lowered. He also had a very low national debt to deal with, so deficit spending was not it wasn't necessarily popular, but it was very possible then because there was so little debt to begin with. And there was a famous story with Reagan, because Reagan did raise taxes at one point, raised income taxes. And people like to point to that and say, see, Reagan raised taxes too. What most people aren't aware of is the whole story on that. I remember Tip O'Neill, Rich.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Speaker of the
Tip
House.
O'Neill is Speaker of the House forever.
Mm-hmm.
And he had promised Reagan, he said, President Reagan, if you raise taxes, we'll cut spending by whatever the amount was. And so Reagan agreed to it. He raised taxes. And the spending cuts, of course, never happened. And a few years later, they asked Reagan again, how about raise taxes again? And Reagan said, I'm still waiting for those spending cuts from 2 years ago. So the whole Potomac two-step, promise this, don't do it. I mean, there's nothing new under the sun there. Of course, that goes back to the founding. But he did have those tools at his disposal, and he also didn't have to deal with social media, 24-hour news cycle. Back then, I think leaders could be a little bit more long-sighted and be true leaders versus politicians, because while there was daily news, it wasn't this humdrum of constant, oh, the president wore a blue tie today. What does that mean? Oh, that means he's going to raise taxes. I mean, they're just filling air, but there's so many people that can't see through that noise. And then it further divides the country. So although there was that malaise back then, we were pretty united as a country.
Well, that's what they said. There was some pundit talking. He said, you had Reagan and Tip O'Neill about as far apart as two American politicians could be or have been, and yet they could come together and work together and find some sense of common ground. Now, the fringes are pulling this country apart. But I want to go back to it. You said something that reminded me. I can't remember what you said. Well, it's not necessarily important, but I want to help you wrap your head around these numbers, or folks out there that like servicing the debt. What are you talking about? 28 trillion. But what's the problem? Let's put it into the context of something most people can understand. Let's talk about a sugar granule, right? When you see a teaspoon of sugar, look at that teaspoon of sugar. Imagine it, if you will. That's roughly 20,000 grains. When you're looking at a teaspoon of sugar, you got 20,000 grains. So that a 4-pound bag of sugar, right, has 8,640,000 grains in it. But to get to 1 billion grains of sugar, you would need 115 bags. So imagine, I want to get 1 billion grains, Will. How many bags do I need? About 115 bags. I want to get to 1 trillion. I want to get to 1 trillion grains of sugar, 1 trillion grains. Now, think of how tiny those things are. I would need 115,000 bags of 4-pound bags of sugar. It would weigh almost 463,000 pounds. But to service the debt, if we were paying it off in grains of sugar, if we were going to pay off our 28 trillion, it's almost 29 now, 28 trillion dollars, if all they wanted was to collect it in grains, there would be over 3 million bags of sugar, and it would weigh over 12 million pounds.
Wow.
It would fill up like 2 giant Astrodomes, you know what I'm saying? With 4-pound bags of sugar, just to get to 28 trillion grains. So people that hear these numbers, billion, trillion, come on, man. These are astronomical numbers, folks. They almost mathematically cannot be serviced without destroying our economy.
Yep. Hey, well, you mentioned one thing about Reagan and O'Neill couldn't have been further apart on the political spectrum. But one thing they did every single week, Rich? They
had lunch together or something, right?
They sat down with their wives and had dinner together once a week.
Yeah.
Can you imagine that happening today? I mean, make it whoever you want. Make it Trump sitting down with Pelosi, or Biden sitting down with, the name escapes me right now. Maybe somebody like a Rand Paul, right? oh my gosh, both sides would go nuts. I can't believe he's sitting down with that monster, you know.
Well, yeah.
And then
Dan
we
Crenshaw
wonder
and
why nothing
AOC
gets
sitting
done.
down. Can you imagine that?
I'd buy the pay-per-view for that.
Yeah.
I'd pay good money to see that.
Another way of thinking about this 28 trillion, if you were imagining grains of
Oh, Rich, we're lost you there, brother. I think you're having internet issues. Hey, brother. Hold on, everybody. I'm going to fire off a text message here. See if we can get him to reset. Oh, and we lost him. Well, folks, I'll take it over from there, I guess. So, next week, actually not next week, Monday the 13th of December, we're gonna go into the Great Moderation, which is the period from 81, 82, when things settled down, when interest rates started normalizing again. We're going to run that all the way up through about 2012, past the Great Recession, because not much happened in there during the Great Moderation. We are going to talk about how they've changed the way numbers are calculated for inflation, unemployment. Maybe not so much unemployment. They didn't really change the way they're calculated, but they changed the number they report. There's 6 different types of unemployment numbers out there. So they've done some gamesmanship with the numbers there. So it makes it really hard to compare numbers today to numbers from the 70s. It's not an apples and apples thing. So with that, I know Rich has a really good interview coming up on Monday with I believe his name is TJ Denny. He was telling me about that last night. Sounds pretty interesting, pretty exciting. So folks, the fight's coming. Be ready.